Tonight, should librarians be prosecuted for the books they allow to be checked out?
It's going to reduce the amount of materials that are getting into students' hands.
Why a proposal to give parents more power over school libraries has some educators concerned. Plus, controlling unruly passengers in the air.
Like an endless cycle of there's no accountability, there's no way to keep track.
How workers at American and Southwest want Congress to help them handle hostile passengers. And later, treating an overdose over the counter. The FDA expands access to Narcan amid an opioid epidemic. Capital Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capital Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. Are Texas students ready for life after high school? According to a new report from the nonpartisan group Texas 2036 and the George W. Bush Institute, a large number are not. They say nearly 80% of Texas 8th graders are not achieving college or career milestones within 6 years of graduating high school, and 19% don't graduate at all from a public high school. The study also found that at no point in the Texas educational pipeline are more than 60% of students ready for the next grade level. At the state capitol, the conversation about education was focused on library books today. A Senate bill expected to be debated tonight would allow parents to have more control and information over what their student can check out from their school library. Our Charlotte Scott reports.
Arresting librarians. Soon, they could be charged for distributing potentially obscene material to a minor if a bill by North Texas Senator Angela Paxton passes. It would remove protection for people who give out books for scientific or educational reasons if some find those books harmful. That worries the Texas Library Association.
Anyone who has a problem with a book, who doesn't agree with the book that has been brought into the school by the school board or the school library council, would be able to call law enforcement on the librarian.
The bill would also establish a local school library advisory council, create a process for parents to challenge library material, and allow parents to opt in to receive notice every time their student checks out a book.
It's going to place a really heavy administrative burden on a librarian to notify a parent every single time a book is checked out.
There are plenty of administrators who can handle the role of making sure that parents get the notice that they deserve.
Mary Elizabeth Castle is with the conservative organization Texas Values. She supports the bill because it would expand parental rights, a top priority for Republicans this legislative session.
Kids have these access to these books without any type of supervision, and I think a parent has the ultimate parental rights to know what their child is bringing home and reading.
A letter about inappropriate books in schools sent by a former Republican representative spurred challenges to children's books, specifically regarding race and sexuality. Since then, lawmakers and parents have joined in by trying to remove certain books from school libraries, and there's been an increase in investigations into librarians.
To have your professionalism questioned by a small vocal minority of individuals is really threatening, and librarians do not feel safe working in their schools and in their communities right now.
While some see the need to track and remove books, others don't. Various schools and stores have created banned book clubs to push back.
We have to remember that every family has a different set of values, and just because your values aren't those of your neighbors, it doesn't mean that your neighbors' values are wrong.
The debate about what children should and shouldn't be able to pull from school libraries is bound to continue. For Capital Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
And joining us now to discuss this further is Carol Harrod. He's a lecturer on library and information studies at Texas Women's University and spent 2 decades working with librarians in Texas. Professor Harrod, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
How do you think this bill, the Senate Bill 13, could change what's in school libraries across Texas?
Well, I think that what people need to realize is there are lots of implications to several of the bills that are in the Texas House right now. What I don't want to see is criminalization of librarians and library work. What we need to do is champion librarians because they are information professionals. They have criteria for selection and acquisition, review and weeding of materials. And these are the same people who've always been reading to your children, the same people who have been helping you with information needs for decades. It's just the attitudes have changed about librarians, and they're not an evil cabal of people who are trying to, groom your children.
Sure.
They are information professionals, and they want to do what's right by their community.
Well, and what do you think this will mean for librarians if this does pass, and how they do their jobs?
Well, it's going to have a chilling effect. There's no doubt about that. If you are threatening librarians, or some of the bills right now are threatening publishers. They're making publishers label books, and what does that do if you've got a label on a book? And you have a child check it out, and it's got the label, that also labels the child. And that speaks to privacy, and it speaks to voluntary inquiry, which children have the right to in school libraries.
Republicans say this is about protecting kids, allowing parents to know what their kids are reading, having access. I mean, what kind of access is there already to that? Because they can go in and say that they want a book removed, right?
Sure, there are procedures in place, and there have been. I was on reconsideration committees when I was a practicing librarian, so there are tools in place. Approach your librarian. If you have a problem with a book, or if you think it needs to be recategorized or removed, there is a process in place, and there's a committee that will consider this. You won't always get the result that you want. The book may not always be recategorized or removed, but your voice will be heard. Mm-hmm. And so I would tell people to work through the process, contact their librarians, and just work through it, because it's there for people to use.
Lastly, what do you think this will mean for providing materials for a wide range of students?
Well, that's part of what we teach in library school. If you come to Texas Women's University, there is a whole graduate level class called Collection Development and Management. So that teaches people the principles of having a diverse collection, of avoiding censorship, of how to select and acquire materials, and to make sure that there's something for everybody. And I love that about libraries. Everything has a space and a place. And so, your religion section, all the religions live side by side, all the countries live side by side. So, that's the kind of library I want, and really the kind of world I want to live in, where everybody has a voice and everybody's story is heard.
Professor Carol Herod of Texas Women's University, thank you so much for your time.
Good to see you. Thank you again.
Retired Texas teachers are one step closer to getting a long-awaited pay bump. The state Senate unanimously approved a bill today to give a $7,500 check to retirees older than 75. And those who have been retired 2 to 9 years would get a 2% cost of living adjustment, while those retired at least 10 years would get a 4% adjustment. Both chambers agreed retired teachers need the extra cash amid high levels of inflation. The allotments will cost the state about $4.7 billion, paid for upfront out of this year's surplus funds. The Senate also advanced several bills today affecting transgender Texans. Senators voted to give initial approval to a bill restricting which college sports teams transgender athletes can join. They also passed a measure that would block minors from updating their gender on their birth certificates, and they okayed a scaled-back bill that would ban gender-affirming care for minors. The author made a last-minute change that would allow trans children already receiving such care to continue getting it. The bills all passed along party lines, and Democrats raised concerns about the Republican-led legislation.
What if the majority of the votes get it wrong today? It could actually be life and death matters.
Major medical groups approve of gender-affirming care and say it lessens higher rates of depression and suicide for trans youth. Turning to Washington now, where flight attendants from some of the nation's largest airlines, including two Texas-based carriers, descended on Capitol Hill, urging Congress to pass legislation banning disruptive air travelers from future flights. This comes after the number of airline passengers intimidating or acting violently toward airline staffers remains high after increasing during the pandemic. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante has more.
It's been almost a year since the government ended its pandemic mandate that airline passengers wear masks. The rule caused many passengers to lash out at airline personnel. But some flight attendants, like this one who works for Fort Worth-based American Airlines, say they still have experiences like this.
The passenger refused to comply with the request and proceeded to call me a fat, bald C-word. He approached me threateningly, spitting on me.
Earlier this month, this fight broke out between passengers flying Dallas-based Southwest Airlines. And this man was arrested aboard a United flight after he allegedly attempted to open an emergency exit door and stab a flight attendant.
Assaults continue to happen even after the mask mandate is gone.
Several flight attendants and their union leaders touched down in Washington, D.C. Wednesday to support a bipartisan bill to create a no-fly list of unruly airline passengers. Anyone convicted or fined for assaulting, intimidating, or interfering with airline crew members would be banned from further air travel. Tom McDaniel of Houston is a 31-year veteran of Southwest Airlines.
We want to make sure that the people get due process, but at the end of the day, if you assault an airline employee, specifically a flight attendant, we don't want you back on the plane.
The American Civil Liberties Union opposes the legislation, arguing such bans tend to discriminate against people of color and lack transparency. Some Republicans, including Texas Senator Ted Cruz, opposed the legislation last year, arguing it was federal overreach and violates constitutional protections tied to interstate travel. Cruz is now the top Republican on the Senate committee responsible for overseeing aviation safety, and it doesn't appear his stance has changed. In a statement, Cruz's office said violence against crew members or passengers is, quote, illegal under multiple different federal laws. The Department of Transportation has authority to go after those who use violence or threats of violence, and they need to use it.
I don't know any flight attendant who lives in Texas, whether that's Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, or where I grew up, Midland, who doesn't think that they should be safe when they go to work, and our senators should be listening to us about that.
A bill, some say, could make our skies a little friendlier. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
Rena, thank you. And still to come on Capitol Tonight, the push to make opioid overdose reversing drugs more available. How moving Narcan from behind the pharmacy counter could save lives. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines across Texas. The University of Texas at Austin deleted some of the affirmative action policy language outlined on its website. This comes as top state leaders have railed against diversity efforts in hiring, including threats to withhold state funding for schools with those policies. A spokesperson told Axios the edits were part of larger rebranding on the website and that the school's affirmative action policy has not changed. A North Texas school district is now the first ISD to decide to leave the Texas Association of School Boards. South Lake Carroll ISD trustees say they object to the group's promotion of diversity and inclusion. This comes a couple months after 9 GOP state lawmakers wrote a letter to school districts urging them to withdraw. The association provides training, policy guidance, and insurance to the more than 1,000 Texas school boards. And 2 Democratic congressmen from Texas say they'll vote with Republicans on a measure that would roll back energy policy passed last year. Representatives Vicente Gonzalez and Henry Cuellar told the Texas Tribune they'll vote for a GOP bill to lessen energy restrictions and expand fossil fuel production. Gonzalez and Cuellar both represent districts with a lot of oil and gas workers. Turning now to the opioid epidemic. With drug overdose near record levels, today federal officials approved selling an opioid reversal drug without a prescription. The nasal spray Narcan is the leading version of naloxone and will soon be the first opioid treatment drug to be sold over the counter. It'll come in a package of 2 doses and should be available by late summer. This is meant to significantly expand access to the life-saving treatment. We want to bring in Catherine Neal Harris now to discuss this further. She's a fellow in drug policy at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Catherine, welcome back to the program. Nice to see you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
How does making Narcan over the counter improve access? I mean, what does this mean? We'll be able to get it in grocery stores, online?
Exactly. So that's the idea, is that now it could become available in grocery stores, online, gas stations, really anywhere that the business wanted to retail it, they could. And it is a really big deal because, so far there have been barriers to access to Narcan. One of which is that it just isn't, every day accessible to somebody who wants to stop in the store and pick it up. So this is intended as a way to pave access and to really just create fewer barriers to its access.
What about the cost? I mean, how costly is it now, and will this making it over the counter help bring down the cost?
Yeah, so that's one of the kind of big challenges right now. So currently, if you go to the pharmacy and because you can request a Narcan at the pharmacy without a prescription, from the pharmacist behind the counter. And if you have insurance, the insurance will usually cover the cost. But insurance companies don't usually cover the cost of over-the-counter medications. So as of right now, the Narcan that would be available over the counter people would have to pay for it out of pocket. And the cost varies, but it's somewhere between $70 and $110. No. So the FDA is trying to incentivize the industry who makes that drug to bring down the costs.
How easy is it to access it now? I know we've talked a lot on the show of just trying to get more of this in the hands of more people. The governor, state leaders pushing for expanding access to this. How difficult is it right now?
Yeah, so it really partly depends on where you live. There are organizations throughout Texas who try to make it available to people at no cost, right? You can try to Google and find your local harm reduction or treatment providers to do that. But, in terms of availability at pharmacies, it really varies by pharmacy. There are some pharmacists who carry it. There are others who don't carry it because they, frankly, they don't want to sort of there's just the kind of continued stigma against people who use drugs that prevents that access. And so, here where I live in Houston or, in Austin, it might be fairly easy versus, if you live in a more rural area.
Yeah. Are there any drawbacks to over-the-counter sales? I mean, like making sure people are educated on how to use this drug?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that the FDA approved this version of naloxone specifically, this nasal spray, is because it's so easy to use. There are 1-minute videos on YouTube that show how to use it. If you've ever used one of those nasal sprays when you have allergies, it essentially works in the same way. So I think the concerns about ease of use are minimal. I think the main concern now is just sort of how long it's going to take to make it over the counter, and then also what that price point is going to be.
Yeah, Catherine, it will come in a 2-dose package, as mentioned. I mean, is that typically what's needed to help treat the patient?
Yeah, so again, I hate to keep saying it depends, but in some cases with the fentanyl-related overdoses that we're seeing, sometimes it does take more than 2 doses of the Narcan nasal spray to revive a person. And so that's why, sometimes it's good to have more doses on hand. It's one reason that we're seeing stronger formulations of naloxone being made available. Also worth mentioning that there is an injectable form of naloxone that you can inject into the muscle, much cheaper than Narcan, and also can be more effective at reversing an overdose. But it does require a little bit more training. People are typically less comfortable with, sticking a needle in somebody than they are with the nasal spray. That is another issue, is sort of the dose and the strength and, what people might need for different situations.
Yeah, a lot of good information. Catherine Neal Harris, an issue we are continuing to follow. We'll get you back on. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And still to come on Capitol tonight, the push for gun reform, how Democrats in Congress are pressuring their GOP colleagues to tighten restrictions on firearms. You're watching. Welcome back. Just days after the deadly mass shooting at a Nashville elementary school, Congress does not look any closer to moving forward on new gun safety laws. This comes as President Joe Biden renews calls for reforms. Reuben Jones reports from Washington.
48 hours after sirens rang through the halls of an elementary school in Nashville.
Weapons of war have no place in our streets.
The voices of members of Congress call for change.
We have to step up.
House Democrats Wednesday urged Republicans to join them in supporting universal background checks for gun buyers and a ban on military-style semi-automatic weapons like the ones used in Nashville.
House Democrats have acted over and over and over again to pass legislation to fix this. If not now, when? And to my Republican colleagues who refuse to act, if you don't want to get to work, get out of the way so that the rest of us can.
The renewed push comes after President Joe Biden said Tuesday there's no other executive action he legally can take on guns. It falls to Congress.
We will continue to look to ways to work with the White House faced with inaction here, but an assault weapons ban needs an act of Congress, and that's what we need to do.
Democrats acknowledge that Republicans have shown no interest in supporting such legislation, and that without GOP backing, the reforms cannot become law. But by repeatedly reintroducing such proposals, Democrats hope to eventually make Republicans pay a political price for their opposition and push the reforms through. So far, though, Republicans are not budging.
Do you think it's time now for a ban on AR-15 weapons?
Absolutely not. It won't solve the problem.
He wants to go back to his left-wing agenda where we take away firearms from law-abiding citizens. I don't have any interest in that.
Congress did pass bipartisan gun safety legislation last year that includes tougher background checks for the youngest gun buyers, but advocates say it's far from enough. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Capitol Tonight.
And before we go tonight, a longtime crusading liberal magazine will live on. The Texas Observer's nonprofit board reversed course today. They had planned to lay off its staff due to financial troubles, but that changed when an emergency appeal by staff to save the 68-year-old publication raised close to $300,000. According to the Texas Tribune, board members noted the Observer still faces significant obstacles to its long-term survival. That is all the time that we have tonight. We're back again tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.